Welcome to the Growth Shift. I'm David Zylstra. Here's what I've learned after years in business. Every leader who's built something meaningful has a story, but the moment they had to shift, when failure forced innovation, when change became opportunity, when they chose growth over comfort. On this show, we dive into those pivotal moments, the setbacks that became breakthroughs, the strategic shifts that accelerated growth, and the frameworks that turn obstacles into opportunities. Because here's the truth. In a world where change is the only constant, the leaders who thrive aren't the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who've learned to shift strategically through it. So whether you're facing your own pivot point or just want to learn from someone who's been there, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Today, joining us on the Growth Shift is Darren Webster, founder of Goalster, a performance enablement platform that's been redefining how organizations execute on their biggest objectives. What makes Darren's story compelling isn't just his rise from part-time retail rep to leading teams of thousands at Verizon, or even his background as a world championship level athlete for Australia. It's what happened on his 40th birthday, the first day of his vacation in Costa Rica when Verizon laid him off, forcing him to completely reimagine his career and his approach to helping people achieve their goals. Today, Darren is building something he wished existed during his corporate days, a platform that bridges the gap between strategy and execution, helping organizations unlock the hidden potential in their teams. Darren, great to have you on the Growth Shift today.
Thanks for having us.
Now, you went from being a world championship athlete in Australia to immigrating to the US and starting as a part-time retail rep at Verizon, and of course, eventually creating their entire corporate distribution strategy. Walk me through that journey. I mean, why did you make the transition from professional athlete to moving to the US and starting at such a low level in an organization you had no experience with?
Well, I married an American girl is the first part of that. So yeah, I met my wife on a plane when I was traveling back and forth from Europe to Australia after competing. And we spent a couple of years in Australia. I worked for a company called Optus, which is the second largest telco in Australia. But when I moved to the US, we decided that was going to be a better place for the family to start. Australia's a very expensive place to live, certainly in Sydney anyway. And so I had to get a job somewhere, and telecommunications was an area that I did have some experience, but you had to start from the bottom, and I ended up putting in an application to work for Verizon, and fortunately they took me on board. But once I got into the company, I started to realize just how many opportunities there were to advance my career, and it was a very merit-based, performance-based culture, which I really loved. And I just got after my career and wanted to eventually lead the whole company, and that was the goal. I started, again, just selling phones in the stores, but ended up leading smaller teams and then progressively larger teams. But yeah, on my 40th birthday, I got a bit of a curveball thrown at me, so to speak, but that was really the goal, was to end up running Verizon. But after that layoff, it forced me to basically rethink my career, what I wanted, my own goals, and that birthed Goalster.
That's incredible, and I mean, I think it says a lot about you and your character, going from a recognized professional athlete to really working on the floor in a retail environment, right? Being able to, have the humility to step into that, but also the perseverance to continue pushing forward and earn your merit again. Can you share with us part of what allowed you to make that transition, not just make the transition successfully, but then to also recognize the opportunity and put yourself through that again to climb the ladder from the bottom up? I mean, was it something that you took away from being an athlete? Was that transition more difficult than you thought it would be? How did you really end up in the position you were at with Verizon?
It's funny because being an athlete and being in kayaking, the sport that I chose, well, it's an Olympic sport. It's not one that you can make a ton of money out of. So at some point, no matter how high a level you get to, you've got to, get a real job at some point. But when I landed at Verizon, because it's such a large company, because there were so many opportunities, and because it was very merit-based and performance-based, those who really worked hard, delivered results, were the ones that tended to rise above the rest. And so when I first got into the role, even though I was a part-timer at the time, there was pathways for people to get there. And what I did that I think was a little bit different to most was I always had this mentality of that next level that I was constantly looking for. So even though I was in my current job, I always had one eye on what that next one might be. And because I'm a very driven individual, I don't like sitting still in the same role for very long. And so once I had my feet under me and I knew I could do the role that I was in, there was always that level of, okay, how do I chip away at the things that I need to do to be qualified or capable to step into that next role? And that became a theme throughout the whole of my career, that there was this intense focus on getting up to speed quickly, performing at a high standard in the role, but then, okay, what's next? And being able to simultaneously develop the skills or the relationships that allowed me to put myself in a position where I was the obvious candidate. And progressed, jobs sort of came to me because I was reliable in terms of my performance, strong results, those sorts of things, but also building a network and putting myself in a position where I was seen as one of these proactive drivers of the business, where the executives or the team leaders above me would want to put me in a position where I could have more impact on more of the company, whether that's not just as an individual contributor, but if I had a team of 10 people, how much better could we drive results? And progressively I ended up in larger and larger teams. But there was always that sort of drive to push myself beyond what I was doing at that certain point, but having a very structured approach and a disciplined approach, which comes from my athletic background. You know, you've got to do the work in order to be able to perform at the level that you need to. And not everyone found was willing to do that. And so the separation came from me being willing to network with people that others wouldn't call, to innovate sort of performance and execute in a different way that delivered different results. And that tended to be the common theme, is me being willing to do the things that others weren't, to get to a place that others didn't get to.
And I mean, that's just the foundation of what it takes to become a professional athlete, right? Being willing to do the things that others won't, especially over an extended period of time. But you obviously put in an incredible effort, an incredible work ethic at Verizon. You know, you rose in the ranks, but after that, I mean, I'd love to talk about what came next, because that's the type of situation that many people never expect to find themselves in, and when they do, it's detrimental. Many people don't really have what it takes to then pick up and move on forwards in a greater way. I mean, let's talk about that Costa Rica moment. So you're on the first day of vacation, celebrating your 40th birthday. That's a milestone, right? I remember when I turned 30, I was like, wow, life changes. When you're turning 40, I'm sure that's hitting you again. But here you are on the beach, and Verizon lays you off, you know, after a decade of, you know, in a significant leadership position with them. Take me back to that day. I mean, what was going through your mind? How did you actually process that, and what came next?
It was interesting because, you know, Verizon as a company had been sort of downsizing its employees, and in some of the previous roles that I'd held, we'd had to lay off hundreds of employees at different intervals. And so there was this cadence of, you know, the company sort of contracting a little bit. I never thought that I would be part of such a thing, because again, you know, I was on all the high performance, you know, developmental paths, you know, all these executive level programs that I was being offered to, because I seemed to be identified as someone who was going to continue to go. And so, yeah, when I got the call from a senior vice president saying basically, you're it, you know, we're going to part ways, I certainly didn't want to leave. That wasn't at all in my career plans. As I mentioned, the goal was to be the CEO of Verizon, and all of a sudden that wasn't going to happen. So it forced a lot of introspection. It was I describe it as quite a traumatic experience, because all of a sudden everything that you've been working towards for 15 years, all of a sudden up in smoke, feeling like I was somewhat of a significant fish in a large pond. And then all of a sudden now realizing, no, I'm not there anymore. The value that I had delivered didn't seem to be appreciated in the way that I would have expected. And I say to people, you know, I never felt more like what we called a Windows 5 and 2, which is our logins, the last 5 digits of our last name, and the first 2 of our first name. I just felt like a cog, and all of a sudden everything that I'd worked so hard for over those years and all the impact that I wanted to have didn't seem to be at all valuable, and that was very confronting, and it changed my view on what my next 20 years were going to look like in my career. And I went from feeling like I want to be part of this company and have more of an impact to I don't want to go back to corporate and do that same thing and have this happen in another 10 years with some other company. I want to start working on my goals and take the experiences that I've had over that period of time, which I greatly appreciate from the company. It was an amazing experience, but I wasn't going to let that happen to me again. And so the goal then became, what can I do to parlay my experiences and the things that I've done to be able to build something for myself and to have control of my own career moving forward. And that's where I started to focus on what that experience could translate into, and it came to me at a certain point that I needed a platform to be able to multiply the things that made me successful at Verizon into something that I could deploy into other companies to help them establish that same rigor that made me successful as an athlete, but also as an executive, into their own teams. And that's what Goalster has become.
That's fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about Goalster. I mean, what is it you're really building? Because it sounds like you're building something here to empower people, to instill lessons that you have learned and help people progress in the way that you did yourself. What does this really look like for teams who are working with you?
To me, it was I wanted to build a coach in someone's pocket. So when you think about athletes, what makes the best athletes is their discipline, their accountability for executing best practices. So if you think about as a kayaker, there's a certain technique that you need. You've got to go and do the reps in the gym. And as much as you have a goal, mine was to go to the Olympics, it's not going to happen unless you do the work. And if you think about in someone's professional career, they may have aspirations to move up in the company, they may be in a sales role and they want to earn maximum commissions. None of that is going to actually happen unless you execute. And so that execution mode, how do you take best practices and make them standard practice across an organization? How do you as an individual have a clear path between where you are now and where you want to be in the future? And to be able to have that in a platform with an app driving you towards that was sort of the intent. And what I found in my career at Verizon is we would do all sorts of training. I had 15 years of corporate training, but I can only remember 2 of the training sessions that I ever went through. And that was because they didn't really change my behaviors. They didn't change the structure of how I operated as an individual. And with Goalster, I wanted to be able to take those best practices, part them to people, whether it's an individual or 1,000 people, and be able to give them a mechanism to keep driving them forward where others might normally stop. As in their athletic times, not everyone's going to do the work, not everyone's going to do the reps, and that's why not everyone succeeds. But if you can have that sort of rigor and structure delivered through a platform that keeps you focused on those high value activities, whether you're wanting to be a better salesperson, whether you want to develop leadership skills, whether you want to drive organizational performance, it still requires that execution. And that's something that I felt was missing. For all the technology that we had at Verizon, there was no platform that was geared around how do we make sure that our teams are equipped to execute and that they're accountable for doing things that they need to do to succeed. That was where I felt the missing link was, and that's what I wanted to focus on with Goalster.
Amazing. So you're building out a platform here, right? I'd love to look at and learn a little bit more about, how it is you really came to this, right? Because it sounds like working for Verizon, there were, obviously a lot of structures in place, a lot of technology in place. You found success where other people weren't, and maybe that's attributed to, your inner qualities and what you learned in your past as well. But you said something like, was it 15 or 50 different trainings you could almost remember you went through with your time at Verizon, but you only recall maybe 2 of them, right? I mean, surely looking at enterprises of this size, right? They have teams in place. They have directors. You've got multiple levels of management. You've got team leaders who are supposed to be there working with you, mentoring you, coaching you. I mean, why doesn't this work? Why do they need a platform to solve these problems? Where do enterprises really go wrong with the approach they're taking?
I think it's not that they go wrong necessarily. It's just that there are certain factors that work against you. So if you think about, most of us have been through some sort of corporate workshop where we all come in and it's a great session. There's someone teaching you, new skills, or we're talking about a certain training outcome, and then once the session is over, we go back to our places of business, and what happens is something called the Ebbinghaus curve kicks in. And this has been around since like the 1880s. But the Ebbinghaus curve says that within about an hour, you're losing 10% of what you talked about. Within a week, you've lost 90% of it. And for a company like Verizon, despite the fact that they invested, and they used to crow about this a lot, hundreds of millions of dollars in training and development, they bring in these experts. But what happens is the curve kicks in once you leave the training. Those behaviors, those outcomes are not instilled into that rigor afterwards. And so it sort of dissipates the impact of those trainings, and that's why you can't really remember them. You might take away one or two things from them, but it doesn't really change the way you behave. It doesn't really change the way you structure your time. And those are the trainings that I remembered, where it literally changed how I behaved and acted after the training, as opposed to it was great insights and knowledge that I got, but companies invest scandalous amounts of money. And so for us, the opportunity is, how do we take the best practices and the learning, the training that's there, put it into something that can be mechanized and people can be accountable for, am I doing the things that are going to help put this training into action? And are those actions going to deliver measurable results? And there's the way that companies measure that right now is pretty vague. They don't have really good systems to be able to understand whether those training investments have produced anything. And that was part of the goal here and the moment for me when I built Goalster was I realized that if I wanted to go into a company, I needed more than just my intellectual property, my experience, and my ability to speak. I needed to be able to translate that into meaningful behavior change for people. And as I was looking at, I had this 52-week program of all this development work that I wanted to be able to go and do with companies and lots of individuals. And I sat there thinking to myself, this is all great, but I can't pull this off. I'm just one guy. I mean, I'd need my own app. And then all of a sudden it hit me that if I had a platform to be able to instill all of these things into behaviors that people could measure, be accountable to, and that produced results that you could tie back to that, then that would be very different to what's on the market. And instead of paying, $100,000 or $50,000 for a training group to come in and work with a team for a couple of days, all of a sudden, for the same price, you could have an entire platform driving those behaviors over a sustained period of time. That, to me, was where the real opportunity was and why some of the training investments, while well-intended, didn't necessarily hit the mark.
So, you went from professional athlete in Australia, following the girl of your dreams, to America. You started again at the ground floor, worked your way up to an executive level role within Verizon. And through that, you realize or perhaps recognize that although there's a lot of systems and there's a lot of good that larger companies do, they're just not delivering the right structure to their teams to help them stay accountable to what they're doing, to really be able to push themselves forwards. Right? There were mass layoffs. You unfortunately lost your job, and this forced a perspective shift. Right? You realize that there's something that you can do about this. But starting out again on your own, regardless of previous credentials or titles or experience, isn't easy. You go from having not endless resources, but probably seemingly near endless with a company such as Verizon, to being on your own mission now. I mean, what sort of challenges have you been facing going from that role with Verizon to where you are now?
There's probably a couple of ways that you would frame this. So mentally, there's a sort of, you were a somebody in a big company, then all of a sudden you're a nobody. There's 1,000 other people who say that they're a coach or a leadership expert or you just now feel like it's very hard to differentiate. So mentally, that was pretty taxing because a lot of your sense of self-worth and so on is tied to your role. And when all of a sudden that role is not there anymore, and that career path that you thought you had isn't there anymore, that can that's hard. Like, that's the traumatic part. But then there's a matter of, okay, if I'm going to start this thing, I don't want to do it half-assed. I want to make sure that we really put our shoulder behind that. That requires an investment. So I took the severance turning lemons into lemonade. I took the severance and actually built the MVP of the application. So I had to go source a technology provider and make sure I had a design group out of Germany help us with the user interface. And so these were all things that required a lot of time investment, as well as partnering with different companies. And so you had to be very scrappy at that early stage to be able to get something together that was legitimate. But then to be able to bring that to market and get it off the ground required investors. So fortunately, throughout my time at Verizon, I'd been able to showcase a level of proficiency and so on to some of the senior executives who then became my initial investors. And so that allowed us to get more capital to be able to build out the platform to something that's enterprise level. But those early times, it was a lot of taking ideas and trying to put them into something that's relevant, sort of completing the vision, so to speak. But that was something that a lot of people would find very, very challenging, and I certainly did. But that going through that process was a big learning experience that not only produced a platform, but produced the capabilities and the capacity to be able to build something that is enterprise ready. So that was the first challenge. But yeah, mentally it was tough. But then to be able to sort of take ideas, put them into something tangible with a clear outcome was also fairly difficult.
Now, it sounds like what you're doing at Goalster is very different than anything else that's on the market right now, right? You have a great product, you have great experience, you've got a great approach, but it's different. That in itself, I know, can be a problem. It can be a challenge at times, right? Especially when you're talking about working with large enterprises or corporations who might be maybe looking to do things different, but odds are most of their executives are stuck in their ways, right? So how is it that you approach taking a new product such as Goalster to perhaps more traditional industries that could be stuck in their ways and have them actually understand the true value behind it?
It's a great question because it's easier to do nothing and to just keep doing what you're doing, or to that inertia, company inertia. At a company like Verizon, there's so many different systems. There's this bureaucracy. And so for the larger enterprise customers, what I found when I went to them was trying to explain this as a new category. There's learning management systems, there's human resource information systems, there's project management tools that are out there, but this is different. In my previous roles, I would never have used my learning management system to be able to do what Goalster does, because I felt that there was a gap where execution, the thing that actually drives the results, is missing. There was no clarity. There was no tool that we had at Verizon that focused our teams on what do I need to execute today that's going to deliver the results that we need to deliver. Now, explaining that to people is a new thing. There's obviously going to be some resistance to, well, we've got some things that are kind of like that. All of a sudden, it started to dawn on me that maybe that's not the right customer for me right now, where, introducing a new category of software inherently has a lot more questions that need to be asked, and you've got to explain that. And one of the hardest things that about Goalster is that I've experienced is I could deploy it to a small business. We've got coaching clients who use that with their own customers. I could deploy it into a company as large as Verizon and integrate it with some of their systems, but you can't be all of those things. And as a startup founder, one of the criticisms that I think people have had of me is, Darren, you're trying to do too much, or you're trying to go into too many different areas. And what I struggle with is that Goalster is so customizable that it works well with all of them, but you kind of got to pick a lane. And so one of the pivots that we had to make early was, enterprise is a longer sales cycle. It's got more complexity to it. There's a dozen people that need to be involved in the sales process. That just inherently is a path of more resistance. And so with that, we pivoted back to coaches and smaller businesses where they've got a problem of scale and capacity, but they also don't have the technology that allows them to deploy their services. And so our earliest clients were coaches and consultants who wanted something that they could deploy the same way that I did. Instead of just being one person going in and running some workshops, they had now a platform that they could underpin their entire business based on the goals of their customer, which isn't just sales. It could be operational execution, it could be training, it could be anything. Because ultimately, no matter what you want to achieve, someone's got to execute. Whether it's the client has got to execute or the trainer has got to be there to deliver their value. Goalster becomes that mechanism that allows them, almost like a force multiplier, where one coach can now have dozens or hundreds of clients in this platform, all working on their own independent goals, in the same way that I, as an organizational leader, might have goals for my new employees coming in or my leaders who have just been promoted. It's all still related to execution, but that confusion around who is my ideal customer, that was one of the hardest things to navigate, especially early on.
And so earlier you were focusing on smaller coaches. Now you're focusing on enterprise level potential clients and markets. I mean, with those enterprise sales cycles being much longer and more complex, needing to get multiple decision makers, bought into your vision, how do you actually identify and choose which direction to go with companies like this? Because you can find them everywhere. And with a platform that is newer and one that can help, I mean, you you could go in any direction. So how do you actually approach connecting with people who you can help and being noticed by them?
Yeah, so I think part of it is the advantage that I have is that I'm a networker. Though I'm quite an introvert, I have the desire to connect with people who could be influential. Because of my time at Verizon, not only was I able to access investors who saw my capabilities and trusted that I'd be able to deliver, but they were then the connectors of some of our clients. So I leveraged my Verizon network in a big way because that was to me a competitive advantage where I could bridge that trust gap very quickly. So I'm not just some random person asking them for a meeting. I'm being introduced by someone who already knows me and knows the quality of what we do to be able to then get to that right person. And I think we're still pivoting in terms of what's the optimal size. Huge enterprise like Verizon, again, that's probably the path of most resistance. Too small a company and their systems aren't sophisticated enough where it requires a platform like this, or they don't have as many people. But ultimately, we're probably landing in that SMB space right now, where you've got companies that they've got enough sort of traction where they've got a significant employee base, where now the CEO can't just be there talking to each individual person. They need to be able to structure their priorities and their objectives and be able to connect that back to the individuals in their company and have that visibility and accountability throughout so that they know what goals this individual's working on. Are they making progress towards them? And to be able to provide the resources to them. We've found that that's a much, it's got the best of both worlds where they're big enough, but they're not too big. But that has come through so many networking discussions. It's come through lost deals, won deals, and really, having to persevere through this I guess process of understanding what the ICP actually is, and that's something that has taken a lot of patience. It's been very frustrating in a lot of respects, but it's one of those things that even if you look at some of the most successful platforms that are out there, I mean, even Slack as an example, took 5 years to achieve product market fit, and now we think about it, oh, it's Slack. But 5 years for them to really figure out who their customer was. And so even for us, it's been quite a process to be able to narrow that down. And you can only really do that by talking to people. Make a few sort of efforts in a certain area. You might see some traction, but then you might find that there's another area that is more target rich. So that's been one of the more frustrating things, but it's a necessary part of the process to get to where you want to go.
Absolutely. Darren, I'm curious here. It sounds like you're moving in a great direction with Goalster. It sounds like you've got, let's say you've got a bright future, right? There's a lot of opportunity. There isn't much competition. Of course, you're up against certain challenges, but you're working through those challenges, right? I think the nature of many tech platforms and what many companies look for in them is the ability to streamline operations, but also reduce costs. And ultimately what that means in the long run is sometimes, making positions obsolete, right? When we're starting to look at new tech, especially with the emergence of AI, I'm really curious about how it is you view this and how it is you're taking Goalster to companies and positioning it, right? Sure, for the value that it can bring in training and setting goals and helping in development, but with the experience that you had at Verizon, having to lay off hundreds of people through your time and ultimately facing a layoff yourself eventually, I mean, it almost seems like there's a little bit of a contradiction there. What are your views on, what Goalster is going to provide to people and, how AI is going to come into the play and, really what this means for employees long term as well?
Yeah, look, so there's a few things that AI can do for us on a positive note. Can it make the platform more intuitive? Can it help us take the data that we get from client utilization and so forth and make that help tell a better story, to be able to make that coach in your pocket smarter and more predictive? There's a lot of value that I think is there. There's also, as you see every day, companies making decisions based on creating these efficiencies with AI, so that they don't need as many people, and that's something that obviously I personally experience, not necessarily because of AI, but companies are leveraging these efficiencies of this new technology not to make their people better, but to reduce the number of people that they have, and I think where I sort of I see it as an opportunity for us to deliver more value and a better user experience and to assess the data and make it even more actionable. There's also the reality of, there's a lot of people who are going to be looking for work. And what we focus on is how do we make the individuals better at work, whether it's better in their performance, better in their development. We can use AI to understand how to do that more effectively. We could use AI to help integrate with other platforms so that we can bring in the best of what's already there, so that you're not just adding more to the tech stack, you're allowing them to get more from their tech stack and to focus the individuals or the teams so that they execute better and produce more. And that's ultimately what companies are needing these days. They want their employees to, or they want to do more with less. And AI is a way to help streamline certain processes and workflows. But ultimately, where we sit is how do we use AI to be able to make the performance of the individual and the performance of the team even better, because they're working and they're focused on the right things. And AI can help us put that path in front of teams or individuals so that they've got that next best thing that they should be working on to achieve better levels of performance or faster levels of development, faster onboarding, those sorts of things. But yeah, I'm conflicted in some ways because I see the benefits of it that we can use within the platform, but the real life consequences of how this is impacting people. And companies are predictable in terms of they're wanting to streamline their cost structure, and anything that they can do to reduce their tech stack, simplify their workflows, obviously they're going to do. And that's where I think it comes together. And what we're trying to do is just make sure that every individual knows exactly what they should be working on to achieve their goals, to perform at their best. And AI will be an accelerator to that, but it also has some real world consequences that.
So using AI in your platform primarily to help accelerate, to provide more customized coaching, more customized plans, and all of this as well. But I'd love to chat about this a little bit further because I think that all of us recognize that not everyone has the work ethic, the drive, or the desire to actually get better at what they're doing, right? So, I mean, how do you take that approach, or where does this fit in? If we're looking at, the ability or the accessibility of information to help people improve and that customized coaching, that's one thing, right? But within organizations who maybe that bottom 10 or 15% of employees who really aren't going to value it and aren't going to use it and aren't going to move forwards, I mean, do you feel there is that sort of balance point with AI replacing certain people or certain roles, let's just say, not people, but the roles within organizations?
Obviously, I'm a realist. Companies are not there to provide their employees with guaranteed jobs forever. They have expectations in terms of performance and profitability and making sure that they're running as lean a business as they can. Where I feel in any organization, you're going to have a bell curve of performance where you've got your high performers. There's going to be a few of those who naturally just inherently have the drive and the accountability, and they just do what they do. But the key is, to me, making sure that every single employee has that path of what's going to make them successful. Now, whether they choose to go down that path or not, whether they're willing to do the things that they need to do to achieve that level of performance, that really is a decision that they make. And what I wanted from the platform was to be able to say to everyone on my team, whether it was 1,000 people or 20, is there's a clear path to these objectives which are all important to us. There's certain things that we need. Your role on this team is to execute these deliverables or execute these behaviors or adhere to these certain performance standards. That, if they're not willing to do that, then that's a decision that we ultimately have to come to, is, are you prepared to do what's necessary to achieve the goals that we've set out, whether they're your own personal goals or whether they're the company's. But what I wanted to make sure was that if we had to get to a point where we exited someone from the business, it was because it was very clear that they weren't willing to do that. That to me is the big difference. There's a lot of people who are in that maybe bottom third or bottom half of the bell curve who have the capabilities, they're just not willing to do it. But there's others who have the capabilities and don't know how. And if we can provide that for them, if we could take what makes our top performers the best and replicate that across the organization, we're going to move that bell curve in the right direction and be able to say to those who aren't willing to adopt those things that, hey, this is a choice that you're making. We've given you the tools, we've put a clear path in front of you. And that's the thing that ultimately, they own. And just like me as an athlete, if I didn't show up and do the reps, if I didn't get out on the water, there was no way that I could say that I've done everything that I need to get to the goals that I said I wanted to achieve. And I think that's the same as an organization. It's the same as an individual professional. But I don't think that companies right now have the ability to manage that the way that they ought to. And I think that's the space that Goalster kind of fills. It's not just about content, and I can go to YouTube and watch content about being a kayaker, but unless I actually did the work, there was no way I was going to achieve the goal. And for a professional, I could say, yeah, I want to be a better salesperson, or I want to be a better professional in my field, and I can watch the videos, but unless I'm absolutely putting this action into action, I'm never going to get there, and I have no one to blame but myself if I don't show up. And so what Goalster can become is that mechanism to show what success looks like, to make sure that all the resources are right there, so that really it's my personal decision as to whether I take that step. And I can't be disappointed at the results if the company says, look, I'm not at that level, but I'm also not doing what it takes to get to that level. That's a decision that's on me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you breaking that down, Darren, and I couldn't agree with you more. I've heard it said as well that, many companies or organizations sometimes refer to themselves as a little family inside, but it's less like a family, more like a sports team, right? Because
Yes.
you need to earn your spot on the roster. You need to put in the reps. You need to put in the work, and you need to show that you're willing to be there. Otherwise, why are you there if you're not showing up to practice, right? So, Darren, it sounds like you're really building out a platform here to help people on a large scale, right? To create true impact. And, I don't want to get too apocalyptic here, but I want to bring in an alternate view that I'd like your opinion on as well. Like, it sounds like, yes, the platform you're creating is truly going to, and is truly able to help people improve their position, provide more for themselves, increase their position, provide more for the company as well. But if we take a little bit more of a nefarious look at that as well, or an alternate look at that, it almost seems like it could be a type of platform where certain companies or certain executives who perhaps are focusing more on the bottom dollar than anything else could almost use it as a bit of an inside look at, who do we want to keep, who we can get rid of faster, who can we replace faster, right? Rather than using it to increase the quality of the life and quality of their team, they could almost use it as a way of, culling the herd, in a manner of speaking. Is that something that's crossed your mind before, or I would just love to hear your thoughts on that, really?
I think a lot of software can be used for evil, so to speak. There's you could see it when we talk about the term accountability, for example. It's something that is necessary for high performance. I've got to be accountable for doing the things that will get me to the position that I want to get to. Accountability for most employees is like, my boss is on my case and they're going to hold me accountable, and that is usually a negative. But what I focused on, what I wanted the platform to be, and if I were to roll this out within the company, again, the whole idea is that we're going to shoot for something that's important to you or important to the company. We're going to have this goal that's out there, but we're going to create that clear path to what I can control, not just a number being reflected on a BI dashboard or something, that I've just got to live up to this number that might not even be realistic. Things that I can do personally, that I can control, that are going to make me successful. And if the company can look at that and say, hey, we've got all these people that are doing these great things, then yes, I can assess who's really doing the work and who's not. But that's, again, comes down to a choice of the individual. Am I really here to sort of skate by and hope that I can keep my job for a period of time? That to me is not the goal. But yeah, I could see how someone could potentially use this as more of a punitive thing, but that's not what it's intended to do. And our goal is to, again, optimize performance based on controllable elements, best practices, those sorts of things. That as an individual, why I feel this would be a net positive for everyone is it takes out any sort of lack of clarity in what success looks like for me. If I've got clear objectives, and I've got the behaviours that are in place to get me there, and I make the choice not to do them, that's on me. But if the company can have more visibility into that, they're going to better identify those who are really the drivers of optimal performance, and those who might have, say, better metrics that might be the decision factor in whether they, how they cull the teams. Right now, and I've gone through this a number of times at Verizon, where you have to really almost, the term rate and rank is what actually happens on the back end. You've got leaders who might be far removed from the individual performers who have to then assess who we're keeping and who we're not. And that oftentimes, as much as companies might not want to admit it, is not very much scientific. It's very much subjective. I think this could be a way to ensure that those who are really doing the job, those who are really putting forth the effort, are the ones who are recognized for that. Those folks who are the people who are at the top, they get recognized for their work, but we're also putting in place for those who aren't at the top a clear path for them to be better, and then assess the engagement of an employee and their performance, not based on some arbitrary metric, but what they're actually doing to drive value in the company. That's going to make me make better decisions on if we need to, and that's the reality that the companies are facing. If we need to downsize, who are the people that are really driving this business forward and who are just passengers on it? That's where you get to better decisions, and they're still not great for those who are involved, having gone through it personally. But I sure wasn't a low performer. But I got the call, and I think that's indicative of how subjective some of these decisions are, and that's counterproductive to the overall objective of what the company's trying to get to. They want the right people in the right places who are doing the right work, and if you've got managers who are picking favourites and not doing it based on science but art, I think that's going to lead to bad decisions and ultimately the wrong outcome.
Darren, that's also fantastic. I want to thank you so much for joining the Growth Shift today, for sharing your journey, your vision, your story, and the real impact that you're creating with Goalster. Looking back at everything, from your athletic career to corporate success with Verizon, to then getting laid off and now building Goalster, what's one piece of advice you'd give to another leader who's facing their own pivot point? Maybe they've had, a really hard setback and they're feeling overwhelmed about the uncertainty moving forwards.
It's a good question. I think and I think you just touched on it. It's about just moving forward. Like, you can wallow in the circumstance of, hey, woe is me, this just happened. But ultimately, you just have to at some point say, okay, here's where I'm at. What is the path forward? What's that next objective? And there was always one for me, whether it was as an athlete, I want to make the national junior team. Then I want to make the national senior team. Then I want to go to the Olympics. Like, there was this sort of these different milestones that you have as a corporate employee. I started as a part-time rep, but the next role was assistant manager of the store, then manager of the store, then district manager. There was always that clear path forward, so that no matter what, I could have some progression where I could control the outcome, or at least control my behavior or my work. And as a startup founder, it's not always going to be directly forward. You're going to take some hits, you're going to take some losses. But no matter what, you've still got to learn from that and take that next step forward. If you stay static, if you let the inertia sort of take over, or let yourself become a victim of circumstance, without having that clear path of what's next for me, what can I do that I can control that's going to get me to a better place, then you will be stuck in the one that you're at. So that having that always forward kind of mentality is something that is inherently part of what makes Goalster, I think, a great platform, is that it constantly focuses people on what I can control that's going to get me to that next step, that's going to get me towards that next milestone, that's going to help me achieve the goal that I set out to.
Fantastic. Spoken like a true athlete. It's all about footwork and the basics, right? One foot in front of the next, or, one paddle in front of the next if you're kayaker, perhaps. Darren, for any of our audience who might like to reach out to connect with you, to learn more about what you're doing, or to even perhaps potentially work with Goalster, what would be the best way to find you?
On LinkedIn, so feel free to connect. I'll generally connect with anyone who's a real person. But yeah, go to the website goalster.com. It tells you a little bit more about what we do. But one of the great things about being in the startup world is that you get to collaborate with great people. That's how we cross paths. And obviously, anyone who's willing to throw their shoulder behind Goalster and help make it a success will share in that success. And love to partner with anyone who feels like this could be of value to them.
Fantastic. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
And that's a wrap on another episode of The Growth Shift. If this conversation sparked something for you, whether it's a new perspective on failure, a strategy you want to try, or just the reminder that every setback can become a setup for something bigger, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, the leaders who thrive aren't the ones who avoid change. They're the ones who shift strategically through it. If you're ready to build the systems that help you grow without the chaos, head over to valentix.io. We help businesses like yours scale smarter, not harder. I'm David Zylstra, and I'll see you in the next shift.